I'm 70 years old, and I still live in the same house in Eagle Point, Minnesota, the one I built with my own hands 50 years ago. My wife, Helen, passed 4 winters back, and since then, my life has been quiet in that slow, harmless way people think old age should be. Mornings on the porch with coffee, Thursday poker with the same 3 men who can't bluff to save their lives, and weekends down at Whispering Lake, taking my old Crestliner out, the boat Helen always called my second marriage. That boat was my pride. 20 feet of aluminum and memory. Her name was Looney Tune, because Helen used to say you'd have to be insane to chase walleye at dawn for 40 years straight. She was right, of course, but she also knew that boat was the last place I still felt close to her. Last month my son tried to kill it. He thought I wouldn't notice the punctures near the hull. Small, deliberate, drilled from the inside. He thought the boat would go down quietly at the far end of the lake, sink slow enough to look like an accident. He thought the insurance money would wash away the debt he never told me about. But what he didn't know was that the new security cameras I'd installed, the ones he mocked me for, said were paranoid old man stuff, weren't just watching the driveway. They saw everything, including him. I've replayed that footage every night since. The way he looked over his shoulder before stepping onto the dock. The way his flashlight caught the boat's silver paint like a knife's reflection. He thought he was destroying a memory. What he didn't realize was that he'd just declared war on the only man left in his life who knows how to fight without leaving fingerprints. My name is Harold Miller. I was a carpenter most of my life, the kind who measured twice and spoke once. Built homes for half the town, including this one, and taught shop at the high school after my knees gave out. I'm not a rich man, but everything I own has my fingerprints in it. Every beam, every plank. Helen used to say I could fix anything except people. The next morning I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and an old photo album. Black and white pictures of Helen and me hammering nails into the frame of this house. A photo of our boy at 6 years old standing on the dock, grinning with a perch dangling from his line. I remember the pride that bubbled up when he reeled that fish in. I remember thinking, he'll love the lake like I do. Time doesn't move so much as it piles up. By the time he was in high school, he wanted nothing to do with boats or bait. He discovered cars, cards, and loud music. He asked for money, first for gas, then for college classes he never took, later for investments that turned out to be bets. I'd hand it over more often than I should have, telling myself he'd learn. Helen would squeeze my hand under the table and shake her head. "You're teaching him the wrong lesson," she'd whisper. Maybe she was right. When she died, he hugged me at the funeral but left as soon as the casserole dishes were empty. He didn't visit unless he needed something. When I installed security cameras last year after a rash of break-ins in town, he laughed and called me paranoid. He waved a hand at the tiny lenses tucked under the eaves. "What are you protecting, Dad?" "Your lawn," he said. "Your life savings," I replied, half joking. He rolled his eyes. I thought about all of that as I flipped through the album. Each page weighed more than the last. I hadn't seen the damage coming because I'd been too busy hoping he'd straighten out on his own. Well, hope doesn't plug holes in boats. Helen's voice echoed in my head. "Do something. Don't wait for him to sink you." I closed the album and made up my mind. I would find out exactly how deep he was and how far he was willing to go. The boy I taught to cast a line had become a man willing to cut it, and I had to ask, where did I go wrong? Would you have done anything differently if you were me? 2 days later, I walked into the small brick bank on Main Street where I've held an account for as long as the town has been on the map. The place still smelled like paper and polish. The teller smiled and called me by name. I asked to speak with Jim, the branch manager, a man I'd gone to high school with. We sat in his glass office overlooking the parking lot. I slid the printouts of the security footage across his desk. "Jim," I said, "I think my son's been dipping into my funds. Can you check my accounts?" He frowned and pulled up my statements. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. "You sure you want to see this?" he asked. I nodded. He turned the monitor so I could see. Several withdrawals, thousands at a time, marked with vague memos. Transfer, gift, repay. They were made after midnight, when I was asleep. Somewhere between my birthdays and his emergencies, I'd let him set up online access to help me with bills, and he kept the passwords. Jim whispered, "He's been wiring money to an online gambling site. The account's linked back to your son's name." The room swayed a little. It wasn't the amount that hurt me. It was the deceit. Jim printed the statements and slid them toward me. "I'm supposed to report suspicious activity like this," he murmured. I nodded again. "Do it," I said, "and keep this between us for now." As I walked back to my truck clutching the papers, I remembered the relief on my son's face each time I'd handed him a check. Relief gives way to dependence. Dependence to entitlement. I'd allowed that progression. Now I gathered every bank statement, receipts from checks I'd written, and the new printouts into the maroon folder. I tucked it behind Helen's recipe cards. As I slid the drawer shut, a wave of cold determination washed over me. Debt was the leak I hadn't seen, and it was time to plug it. If I didn't act now, my memories and my home would sync with his decisions. I knew that I couldn't simply forgive him and pretend it's going to stop. I had to win in his own game, and you wouldn't believe how far I'm about to take it. But before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. That night, I sat by the kitchen window long after the lights across the lake went out. The papers on the table looked like small betrayals stacked in rows. I kept thinking of Helen's voice, calm, steady, forgiving to a fault. "He's still our boy," she would have said. Maybe. But a man doesn't sabotage his father's boat by accident. And a father who lets that slide stops being a father. I wasn't built for softness anymore. Each breath felt measured, each decision pre-cut like lumber, waiting to be nailed down. I thought of the night we built that dock together, him dropping screws in the grass, me laughing, telling him patience matters more than strength. Somewhere along the years, I stopped teaching that. Or maybe he stopped listening. Around midnight, his truck pulled into the drive. I heard the tires crunch and knew he'd been drinking. I didn't move. He let himself in without knocking. "You spying on me now?" he slurred. "You got cameras everywhere, old man?" "Only where they need to be," I said. He leaned on the counter, eyes glassy but sharp. "You think you're the victim here?" "No," I said. "I'm the man who built everything you're trying to sell." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You've got no idea who you're dealing with." "I raised you." "That's who I'm dealing with." His smile faltered. "You'd really ruin your own son over some boat?" "No," I said, voice low. "Over a principle." He stared at me for a long moment, then shoved a chair aside and stormed out, the door slamming so hard the clock rattled on the wall. I didn't chase him. The next time I faced him, it would be in daylight, and I'd have every piece of evidence lined up like planks in a frame. For the next week, my kitchen looked like a detective's den. The table was covered in printed frames from the security footage. My son's face blurred by the hood he'd pulled over his head, his hands steady as he drilled into the boat. I took photos of the punctures, numbering each one with a marker on blue painter's tape. I scribbled notes in a spiral notebook, dates, times, his phone calls, my suspicions. Each entry felt like another nail in the coffin of the trust I once had in him. At night I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional owl call. Helen's voice floated back to me from years ago. "Don't let him sweet-talk you." "Protect what we built," I whispered back to the empty room. "I'm trying." I'd always been the slow and steady type. Take your time, check your facts, then act. That patience served me well as a carpenter. It served me less well as a father. I was done being slow. On the third day, I overheard my son on a phone call outside the house. I stepped quietly onto the porch, staying out of sight. "I'm telling you, I'll have the money," he hissed. "I just need a few more days. No, he doesn't know. He's half asleep most days." His words sliced through the summer air. The person on the other end must have been impatient. My son promised again, then hung up and lit a cigarette with shaking hands. He blew smoke toward the lake like someone exhaling guilt. I wrote down the time and the snippet of conversation. I wasn't sure who he owed, but it was someone dangerous enough to scare him. As I watched him flick the cigarette butt into the grass, I realized he didn't see me as his father. He saw me as his bank. The realization burned more than the smoke. With every printed frame and every jot in my notebook, leverage took shape. It had been years since I sat across from Mike Carlson without a fishing pole between us. Mike's hair had gone gray, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. We met at the diner off Highway 18. He ordered black coffee and a slice of pie. I slid the maroon folder toward him and told him everything. He flipped through the photos and nodded slowly. "Insurance fraud," he murmured when he saw the drill marks. "That could land him in prison if you press charges." I shook my head. "I don't want him in prison. I want to protect what's mine and what was Helen's." Mike sipped his coffee. "There is a way. You can put your assets into an irrevocable trust. You retain the right to live in the house and use the boat for life, but he can't touch it. He'd receive nothing if he keeps pulling stunts like this." He took a pen and drew a simple diagram on a napkin. Boxes connected by arrows labeled house, boat, trustee. He explained that an irrevocable trust can't be changed without the beneficiary's consent. I asked, "Can he contest it?" Mike smiled. "He can try. But with this footage and the bank statements, you can argue you're protecting yourself from exploitation. Courts frown on kids robbing their parents." I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that there was a path. Sadness that I had to take it against my own blood. We drafted documents right there, scribbling names and dates, while the waitress refilled our cups. When I signed my name on the dotted line, my hand shook. "Am I a bad father?" I asked. Mike looked at me. "You're a father trying to stop his child from drowning him." There's a difference. We shook hands not on vengeance, but on protection, masked as generosity. I left the diner with a legal plan and a heaviness in my chest. I had to turn to the law to set boundaries in your own family. It might not feel like love or abandonment, but I needed to do it. Back home, I pulled the recorder I'd bought from its box. It was small, black, the size of a thumb drive. I taped it under the dining room table where no one would see. Then I reheated a pot of chili using Helen's recipe: beans, beef, the pinch of cumin she always insisted on. Cooking calmed me. It smelled like the past, when dinner was a place where problems got solved between spoonfuls of stew. I called my son and invited him to dinner. "We need to talk," I said, "about the future." He sounded wary but agreed, probably guessing he'd have to explain himself. Before he arrived, I placed the maroon folder on my desk in the office, its corner jutting out just enough to catch his eye. I made sure the file cabinet was locked and slid the key onto my ring with the boat and house keys. The ring felt heavier now, not from metal but from the decisions stacked on it. When he walked through the door, he sniffed the air. "Smells like Mom in here," he said, almost smiling. I wanted to hug him, but I kept my hand steady on the spoon. We sat at the table. I ladled chili into bowls. We talked about the weather for a minute, about fishing season. Then I leaned back and pressed play on the recorder's remote. His voice came through the speaker, the call I'd heard on the porch. His eyes widened. "What's that?" he asked. I slid a photo of him drilling into the boat across the table. By the time he sat at my table, the ink on his future was nearly dry. I baited my son to catch him red-handed. "Why would you spy on me?" my son barked, his spoon clinking against the bowl. His anger came quick and hot, like I'd invaded his privacy instead of him invading my trust. I set the photo between us, the one with his silhouetted figure drilling holes in Looney Tune. "Why did you drill holes in my boat?" I asked quietly. The question hung in the air, heavy as damp wool. He shifted in his chair, eyes darting to the window, then back to the image. "It was an accident," he lied. "I was trying to fix a scratch." "You think I'd hurt your precious toy?" His voice dripped with contempt. I leaned forward and pushed the maroon folder across the table. "I know about the withdrawals from my account," I said. "I know about the gambling debts. I know you thought sinking the boat would get you insurance money." He swallowed. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Dad, I'm desperate," he blurted. "I owe people you don't want to meet. I thought I could pay you back once I got back on my feet." His words tumbled out, a messy plea stitched with excuses. I opened the folder and showed him the trust documents. "This house and that boat are no longer yours to inherit. I've placed them in a charitable trust. I retain life use. You get nothing unless you prove you can be trusted again." His jaw dropped. "You can't do that," he hissed. "It's my inheritance." I looked him in the eye. "You forfeited your inheritance the moment you tried to drown it." Silence stretched. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. He gripped his spoon so hard his knuckles whitened. "So that's it? You're cutting me out? For good?" he spat. "No," I said. "I'm cutting you off from what you could exploit. If you choose to turn your life around, there may be a future for us. But it will never involve stealing from me or hurting your mother's memory." He slammed his hand on the table. "This is betrayal," he shouted. I shook my head slowly. "This is justice." He realized too late that the boat wasn't the only thing taken out of his hands. He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "You set me up," he said. "You've been spying and plotting like I'm some criminal." His voice cracked. I saw fear behind the fury. The child who scraped his knee and cried for his mother was still in there somewhere, buried under debt and desperation. "Sit down," I said, keeping my tone even. "We're going to talk like adults." He sat, shoulders tight. "You think you're better than me?" he sneered. "You taught me how to gamble. Poker nights, trips to the casino. You acted like it was harmless. Now you look down on me because I lost more than a few bucks?" His words stung. He wasn't wrong about the poker nights. I'd taught him games of chance before he understood odds. I swallowed the guilt and kept going. "You're an adult," I replied. "Those were lessons in fun, not a license to bankrupt yourself and steal from your family." I slid a sheet of paper toward him. "This is a plan. It lists the treatment center I'll pay for, the job training program Mike's office can help you enter, and the number of a counselor. If you commit to this and prove 6 months of sobriety and employment, we can talk about reinstating a small trust. If you refuse, you're on your own." He glanced at the paper, then back at me. "You're dangling carrots," he said. "Like I'm a mule." I nodded. Better a mule with a future than a thief with none. Tears rimmed his eyes, then dried hard. He pushed the paper away. "Go to hell," he whispered. He stood, threw his napkin on the table, and stormed out, the screen door banging open and shut. On the table, next to the chili bowl, lay a single key. He had left more than a key on my table. He had left his last claim. I had troublesome thoughts that night. When someone rejects help, do you chase after them or let them hit bottom? Eventually, I fell asleep. For a week after that dinner, my phone lit up with unknown numbers and voicemails laced with threats and pleading. "You can't do this to me," one message hissed. "I'll take you to court. You'll be sorry." Another message, softer, said, "Dad, please. They're going to hurt me. Please call me back." I listened to each one, saved them, and forwarded them to Mike. True to his word, my son hired a lawyer, or rather found a legal aid who saw a chance to stir trouble. They filed a petition claiming I was mentally unfit, and that my trust was a product of undue influence. They argued I'd been manipulated by my attorney friend and that the video was doctored. We gathered our evidence, videos, bank statements, the recorded phone call, even the scratched drill bit I'd fished from the trash. I felt like a stranger to my own son as I typed up affidavits describing his deceit. One night he showed up outside my house. I watched from the window as headlights cut through the fog. He stumbled toward the porch and pounded on the door. "Open up," he slurred. "We can still fix this." I opened the door a crack and looked at him. His eyes were bloodshot, the smell of whiskey strong. "Go home," I said. "Sleep. We'll talk when you're sober." He threw his hands up. "You're choosing paperwork over me," he yelled. "They're going to break my legs." "Then stop gambling," I replied. He swore and kicked the porch railing. "I hope the house burns down," he spat before stumbling down the steps. I locked the door and dialed the sheriff's office. "Just letting you know my son's upset," I told the deputy, "in case you see him around." In court and on the phone, he swung at shadows while I held the light. A week had passed. We sat in a cramped county courtroom with paneled walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. My son sat at the plaintiff's table in a wrinkled suit. His lawyer shuffled papers, whispering arguments. Mike sat beside me, calm. When the judge entered, everyone rose. I clutched a copy of the trust documents, my hands sweating despite the air conditioning. The proceedings were brief but tense. My son's lawyer argued that I'd been coerced and lacked capacity. She painted my actions as revenge. Mike stood and presented the video, the bank statements, the recorded phone call, and my clean mental health evaluation from my doctor. He explained the structure of the trust. Irrevocable, with me as lifetime beneficiary and a local foundation as the remainder beneficiary. He cited cases where courts upheld similar arrangements to protect elders from financial exploitation. When I took the stand, my son avoided my eyes. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, asked me why I'd created the trust. To honor my late wife, and to prevent my son from continuing to exploit me, I answered. To ensure that what we built isn't destroyed by desperation. She nodded. My son's lawyer objected, claiming hearsay. The judge overruled her. The tension eased as our evidence stacked up. In his turn, my son spoke. He painted himself as a victim of addiction and implied that I'd driven him to it. He said I'd always preferred my boat to him. He faked tears. The judge watched, unmoved. She read the trust documents carefully. Then she cleared her throat. "This court finds the trust valid and irrevocable," she said. "The petitioner's claim of undue influence is unsupported by evidence." Case dismissed. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. He didn't just lose the payout, he lost access to the only assets he ever thought he owned. Mine. Justice sounded like wood on wood, and in that knock I heard Helen. A chapter had closed. I sighed and smiled. The courthouse steps were steep, but my legs felt lighter than they had in years as I walked down them. Mike clapped me on the back. "You did it," he said. "Now go live your life." I nodded, but when I climbed into my truck, a lump rose in my throat. Winning felt like losing in slow motion. My son didn't look back as he shuffled to his car and drove away. Back at home, I put the maroon folder in the bottom drawer and turned the key. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock and the hum of the refrigerator. I stepped onto the porch and sat in my chair. Whispering Lake shimmered under the afternoon sun, as if nothing had happened. A breeze rustled through the pines. The weight of the trial and the weight of my son's absence pressed on my chest. A pickup truck drove by, and I caught a glimpse of a young couple laughing. Life goes on, I thought, with or without our permission. That Thursday, my poker friends came over. "Hell of a week," Jim said, dealing the cards. "You did what you had to," Mike added. The words helped, but they couldn't fill the empty seat at the table. When I took the boat out the next morning, the lake was like glass. I ran my hand along the patched hull. "She's okay," I said to no one. The boat bobbed, unbothered. The water was smooth as glass, but beneath it churned everything unsaid. News travels fast in a town as small as ours. People whispered at the grocery store and gas station. Did you hear about Jack and his dad? Can you believe he tried to sink the boat? Sympathy and gossip share a thin wall. I ignored them. What hurt wasn't their talk, but the fact that it was true. About a month after the trial, there was a knock at my door around midnight. When I opened it, my son stood there swaying. His eyes were red, his beard untrimmed. They kicked me out, he slurred. I lost my job. They said I'm a liability. I could smell alcohol and something sour. He looked around, perhaps expecting to see Helen or some vestige of comfort. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. No, I said gently. You can't. Not like this. He laughed bitterly. You'd turn your own son away? I held up the brochure I'd kept in my pocket. I called the treatment center. They have an open bed. I'll pay for it. You go, you stay the program, and then we talk. He snatched the paper, crumpled it, and threw it onto the lawn. You think some shrink can fix me? He spat. I need money, Dad. Just give me enough to get out of town. No, I said. I'm done financing your escapes. This is the only help I'm offering. He stared at me, eyes narrowing, then took a step forward. For a moment, I wondered if he would hit me. Instead, he shook his head and stumbled down the steps. I hope you die alone, he muttered as he walked away. Some bridges don't burn, they rot from neglect, and I could smell the decay. I loved him, but he declined my love. The air turned crisp as summer gave way to fall. Leaves on the sugar maples flamed red and orange. I spent mornings chopping wood and afternoons working on the Trust's new project, a scholarship in Helen's name for kids who wanted to learn carpentry and boat building. I posted a flyer at the high school and at the church bulletin board. Within a week, I received a stack of handwritten applications. On Saturdays, I gathered a handful of teenagers at my shop. I showed them how to read plans, measure twice, cut once. I let them name the boat we'd build together. We should call her Second Chance, one girl said, glancing at the plaque of Looney Tune above the door. The name fit. As sawdust filled the air, I felt something shift. I wasn't just fixing broken planks. I was repairing the crack that ran through my own heart. Kids who never held a hammer before smiled when their pieces fit perfectly. Parents sent thank you notes. The mayor mentioned the program at a town meeting. Mike joked that I'd become the most popular old man in Eagle Point. I caught myself laughing again, a sound that had been foreign since Helen died. Legacy isn't what you leave to one child. It's what you leave in many hands. In teaching, I found a way to honor Helen without giving my son another opportunity to exploit me. I was about to meet my son once again. Winter arrived early that year. Snow piled up along the porch railings. The lake froze over, turning Whispering Lake into a white sheet peppered with ice fishing huts. In January, I received a letter from my son's lawyer requesting another meeting. Mike advised caution but agreed to accompany me. We met at a cafe in town. The tables were small, the coffee lukewarm. My son sat across from me, looking thinner and older. He wore a second-hand coat that didn't quite fit. He slid a paper across the table, a document acknowledging that he'd read and understood the terms of the trust and would not contest it in the future. He cleared his throat. I'm done fighting, he said quietly. I went to the treatment center. His eyes met mine for the first time in months. I lasted 2 weeks. I left. I'm working odd jobs. I get paid cash. I'm not gambling anymore, but I can't promise I won't screw up. I pushed the document back. I'm glad you tried, even if it didn't stick, I said. Here's what I can offer now. I pulled a small, tarnished key from my pocket, the spare key to the house. This doesn't mean money or free lodging. It means if you ever need to come home to talk, sober, you have a way in. But understand, if you try to take anything again, this house will be done. He looked at the key, then at me. Tears welled. I don't deserve this, he whispered. No, I said. You don't. But we both have to start somewhere. He picked up the key and tucked it into his pocket, then signed the document. We shook hands, his grip weaker than I remembered. A key can lock or unlock. I wondered which choice he would make. As winter dragged on, I settled into new routines. I read Helen's recipe cards like scripture, each stain and note in the margin a sermon. I strung Christmas lights around the porch, their glow bouncing off the snow. On New Year's Day, I walked out onto the frozen lake and drilled a hole for ice fishing. The line slipped beneath the ice, disappearing into dark water. I waited, feeling the cold seeping up through my boots. I thought about my father, who'd been strict to a fault. When I was young and broke a window, he made me pay for it out of my allowance. Consequences, he'd said. That's how we learn. I'd promised myself I wouldn't be as hard. Perhaps I'd swung too far the other way, cushioning my son from every fall until he forgot how to land. In the end, I'd had to become the kind of father my father was, one who drew hard lines, not out of anger, but out of necessity. The sun dipped low, turning the snow pink. I reeled in the line and found a fat crappie thrashing on the hook. I smiled and thanked the lake. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering without letting the wound bleed. I could remember the boy he was and still protect myself from the man he'd become. Spring returned with a slow thaw. The ice receded from the lake, revealing dark water and the promise of walleye. On the first warm morning, I launched Looney Tune from the dock. The boat's engine sputtered, then purred. I steered through mist as sunbeams split the horizon. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. Helen would have loved this moment. I felt her in the warmth on my face and in the creak of the oars. I cast a line and watched the lure sink. A splash broke the surface, and I pulled up a silver walleye, its scales flashing like coins. I held it up to the light and smiled. Behind me, the town stirred awake. Somewhere my son might have been waking up too. Maybe sober, maybe not. I hoped he'd use that key someday and choose conversation over confrontation. I hoped the kids building Second Chance would learn more than how to bend wood, that they'd learn about boundaries and respect. As I sat there, the lake quiet around me, I realized the story wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming agency, honoring Helen, and learning that sometimes justice must be served with your own hands. The line between justice and revenge is thin. Cross the line for blood or hold it for justice? Which would you choose? Please share your thoughts in the comments.
My grandpa's worst really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.